Right, so once the other people come on, we'll start. We'll do the introductions.
Yes.
Then I'll swap the share screen to your presentation.
Say morning, but then I looked. Yeah, it's
Hey Joel, it's Ricky here. How you going?
Well, I can see my head is huge on that screen.
Yes, it's just because you're the only one. So it's like, oh, Joel's got sent. It's like those, yeah, big screens like the sports.
Should have waited a few more minutes before turning my camera on then.
It's all right. Well, we're going to be sharing screen shortly, so you'll be disappearing.
Cool.
How's it in Melbourne today?
It's great.
There you go. Yes. Minimizing now, Joel. It's all right. Teresa's come in.
Excellent.
Hello, Therese.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Hi, Teresa.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you for asking. I have a sick child at home, but so if you hear some weird noises, I apologize.
That's fine. Acceptable. Totally acceptable.
Joel, looks like your pet there wants to join in. That's all good. You can join. My cat used to join when I was at home doing Teams.
I think we shouldn't set a precedent with that one.
Okay.
He's already a lapdog, so.
Oh, all right. There you go. So, Therese, we'll start going once we've got the quorum with the attendees. We're just waiting for Amanda.
Mhm.
Yeah, Chris is coming. And Joe, sorry, Michael. Right, no, Joe.
I think my coffin has trouble down.
Oh, okay. It's the dodgy connections that you kill, is it?
Yeah.
It's sort of $1, are they? That looks. Oh, it's on here. Oh, there it's not.
Is there any way of monitoring that?
Somebody actually takes care of
Yeah,
it.
me.
Oh, there you go.
No, it's fine.
It used to be really dead.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like it's still doing fine, I think.
No, I like to have different colours. That's why it's. And that's why I keep the browns on.
Oh, I see. Right.
Character.
Character. It's just a bit of colour contrast.
So it's not just one plant, like
No, there's about
Yeah,
8 of
like
them in
there's
there.
oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, how you going?
Hey Ricky, Anum,
Good, thank you.
good luck today, Anum. You'll be great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. We're just waiting for Amanda Telford, and then we'll have our quorum. And Michael's here. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, everybody.
Hey.
We're just waiting for Amanda Telford, who's one of the other panelists, and then we'll start the ball rolling.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for Amanda. Alex, Amanda Telford.
Should be on mine.
I got many people come in. Oh, yeah, that's true. But I just need to track down.
Oh, is that Amanda? Oh, Matt.
Yeah.
She must have heard. Hey, Amanda, how are you?
Hi, good morning. Oh, good afternoon now.
Hi, Amanda.
There we go. We have a quorum now, so we'll begin. We've got a cast of thousands here on level 10. So in recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, spiritual connection to country, and in continuing ACU's commitment to reconciliation, of course, it is customary and traditional to acknowledge the country as we pass through. Today, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the First Peoples, the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways. We thank them for their continued custodianship. We acknowledge and celebrate the continuation of a living culture that has been a unique role in this region. We also acknowledge elders past and present and thank them for their wisdom and guidance as we walk in their footsteps. So welcome everybody. So today we have the confirmation of candidature for Anum Urooj. And today on the panel, we welcome the chair, Professor Alex Young, Taryn Sander, who is Anum's principal supervisor, Professor Chris Lonsdale, who's the co-supervisor, Dr. Michael Notel, who's the associate supervisor, thank you from UQ. And on the panel today, we have Professor Amanda Telford and Associate Professor Teresa Dickey, and we thank them all for their time today. And so now I will hand over to Anum. I'm just going to share the screen for the presentation. All right.
All good.
All good.
Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you very much for being a part of my CSE presentation. Okay, so before you get bored stiff, let me provide you with an overview of why I chose this research topic. I am an aunt of 5 amazing nephews and nieces, and all of them are school-going children and adolescents. Now, I have made 2 sets of observations about them. One, that my nephews, they are more physically active than my nieces. And secondly, my nephews, they tend to have more opportunities to be physically active than my nieces. Hence, I was intrigued by this research topic because it's about physical activity within the school setting, and it has a gender component. So I'll provide you with a background on physical activity research and relating it to Delphi and policy research, and then I'll provide you with an overview of my 3 proposed studies. Physical inactivity is a global crisis. By physical inactivity, I mean when one is not meeting the recommended levels of physical activity. And what are the recommended levels of physical activity? They are basically the suggestions based upon research about the minimum amount of physical activity one needs to engage in to have the optimal health benefits. Now, this physical inactivity is related to 5 million deaths annually. Moreover, this physical inactivity is associated with $54 billion loss in healthcare, and $14 billion lost in productivity every year, which is an additional 162 grants for every child every year. On the other hand, physical activity, which is basically the movement of body, as I'm doing right now, that is produced by the skeletal muscles, resulting in energy expenditure that is associated with numerous health benefits, starting in childhood and spanning through adulthood. And these health benefits include, but are not limited to, physical fitness, healthy body mass index, and a reduced sedentary time, which is basically the waking time that you spend in sitting, lying, or in a reclining posture. Now, in terms of the percentage of children and adolescents who meet the recommended levels of physical activity, so there is only 15% of girls who are physically active as compared to 22% of boys. Hence, girls are less physically active than boys. What can be done to increase the physical activity of children and adolescents? Well, schools, they provide a promising avenue in this regard, primarily for 2 reasons. One, children and adolescents, they spend most of their daily time, at least for the first 20 years of their lives, in schools. And secondly, schools provide research-based multiple opportunities to be physically active. The existing research evidence in this regard, it's along two lines. So the first set of evidence, according to it, the school-based physical activity interventions, they are modestly effective to not effective. And the second line of evidence, which tells us that school-based physical activity interventions, they are effective. The question that arises is whether these school-based physical activity interventions are equally effective for girls and boys. And the answer is, unfortunately, no. Even the latest award-winning interventions like the iPlay intervention, even that was less effective for girls, and we don't know why. So what do we do then to make these interventions equally effective for girls and boys? Well, my solution or my answer is that instead of focusing our efforts on looking at the overall effectiveness of these interventions, because we know for sure by now that these interventions, they are less effective for girls than boys, we need to look at the content of these interventions, the components and the strategies that these interventions use, and then look at them, that which ones of those strategies and components make them less or more effective for girls and boys. By components, I mean the broader categories used in an intervention. So for example, the school-based physical activity is one component. Before and after school physical activity is another component. Enhanced physical education is another component. And the strategies are basically the elements falling within each broad category or component. So for example, for the school-based physical activity interventions, we have the active classroom energizers. For the before and after school physical activity, we have active transport or active clubs. Now, the problem is that we cannot get an answer to this question, that how to make these interventions effective for girls, by relying solely on the existing evidence. Why? Because we have limited knowledge with limited certainty, and there may be a lack of agreement among researchers regarding what is effective. Moreover, not all existing interventions in the academic literature, they are evaluated. Hence, we need to look at the alternative options to get an answer to this question, that how to make these interventions effective, and taking experts' opinions is an alternative that can provide an answer to this question. We also need to take into account policy research, because policies literally, they lie at the top of the pyramid. And if we want to have a gender, reduce this gender gap in physical activity at scale, then policy changes are our best bet. However, if these policies, they do not align with the existing research evidence, and if they're not supportive of girls, then unfortunately, we will not be able to implement changes to make the interventions effective for girls and to increase the physical activity of girls. In the light of this information, I proposed 3 studies, the first being a systematic review and a master regression analysis, the second being a Delphi study, and the third being a policy analysis. And we will look at the details of each study shortly. So the first study is basically a systematic review, and it has 3 aims. The first aim is basically to quantify whether there are any gender differences in the overall effectiveness of school-based physical activity interventions. Secondly, which components and strategies of these interventions are equally effective for girls and boys? And third, which components of these interventions work for girls only and boys only? For the method, so we'll be following the MSTAR2 tool, and we'll be following the PRISMA guidelines. Now, the important thing is that this review will be based upon an existing Cochrane review that was published in 2021. However, it is different from this review in 2 regards. A, they did not do any gender analysis. And secondly, they did a macro level analysis. Now, this is something that I was talking about earlier, that what they did was that they had the broader categories or components, and then they grouped together all the strategies falling under each component. And then they did an overall analysis of the overall effectiveness of each broader category or component. What I'm proposing is a micro level analysis. To look at the individual effectiveness of each strategy that is falling within each broader component to determine its effectiveness. The eligibility criteria will be the same that was for the original review, that the studies will be randomized controlled trials with school children and adolescents aged 6 to 18 years. The interventions will be school-based physical activity interventions, and the outcomes will be physical activity, physical fitness, sedentary time, and body mass index. So we'll be using different databases to update the list of included studies. So for the procedure, we'll start with screening, and we will rerun the set strategy, and we will send rerun analysis or share data emails to the authors of studies to get gender data. And then we will update the eligible studies and upload them to Covidence. Sorry, I'll come back to it. And then for the data extraction, we'll be using two frameworks. So at the component level, we'll be using the comprehensive school physical activity framework, which has 5 broad components. And the strategies falling within each components, for that, we'll be using the theory of expanded, extended, and enhanced opportunities for youth to be physically active. Now, by expanded, sorry, this can get confusing sometimes. So by expanded, I mean introducing new opportunities to be physically active, for example, active classroom energizers. By extended, I mean increasing the time of the physical activity. So for example, increasing the time of the normal PE lesson. Expanded, extended, and by enhanced, I mean keeping the original physical activity strategies, but going above and beyond to make them like more physically active. So for example, in case of physical education, you can educate the students as well to increase their physical activity. So I'll come back to it. And then after the, data extractions for the risk of bias assessment, we'll be using the risk of bias 2 tool. And then for the data analysis, we'll be doing the match and regression analysis using the Q coefficient, and we'll do it at 2 levels, so the strategies level and the components level. So that's about study 1. And now let's take a look at the details of the study 2, which is basically a Delphi study. And the aims of this study are basically for the to ask the experts that what, in their opinion, are the most important and feasible components to increase the physical activity of girls. What do they think are the common yet ineffective components to target girls' physical activity? And then to ask them that what do they think about why, in general, girls do not benefit from the existing interventions. So for the method, it will be a Delphi method, so an online survey comprising of open-ended and closed-ended questions. The participants will be 30 people from 3 walks of life. So academics and researchers, and the eligibility criteria will be that they have a PhD in the area of physical activity, and they have published at least 3 peer-reviewed articles in the preceding 5 years. For the school educators, so either the school principals who have a minimum of 5 years of experience in managing a school and having a background knowledge of physical activity policies, or physical education teachers having a minimum of 5 years of experience. And the last category is government experts, so from the relevant departments like health, education, sport, tourism and recreation, transport, and having minimum of 5 years of experience in the physical activity of children and youth. For the procedure and data analysis, so we'll be following the CREDIS guidance. So there will be 3 surveys. In the first survey, we'll ask the experts some open-ended questions, and then we'll code their responses into themes and categories. In the second survey, we'll ask experts to express their agreement or disagreement on the themes and categories that are created in Delphi Survey 1 using a Likert scale of 1 to 5. And in the last survey, there will be a re-rating by the experts to settle any discrepancies and to build a consensus. That's all about study 2, and then study 3, which is basically a policy analysis. And the purpose of the policy analysis is basically to determine whether the existing school-related policies are supportive of goals, whether the policies they align with the existing research evidence that will be identified in studies 1 and 2, and how schools and government can either modify existing policies or introduce new policies to increase the physical activity of girls. For the methods, so the study design, so we'll be following the CAPA framework, which basically has 6 categories. We'll be following the first category, which is the purpose of analysis, is auditing and assessment. So by auditing, I mean the absence or presence of a physical activity policy. And by assessment, it's the examination of the quality of that policy against certain criteria. So CAPA model, they just define physical activity policies as formal, informal, written and unwritten statements, guidelines, and procedures. To identify the policies, so we will be using 3 ways. First, we'll search the websites of the relevant departments. So again, health, education, sport, tourism, recreation, transport, and any other relevant department, and look at the policy sections of these departments to get to know about the relevant policies. Secondly, we contact these departments themselves in case we are not able to find out anything on the websites or miss anything. And third, we'll contact the Global Observatory of Physical Activity Country Contact. So GOPA is basically a global alliance in many countries, and it is comprised of specialists in the area of physical activity. Now, the countries that we choose to do a policy analysis, and these countries will be the ones that have policy documents available in English language, A, and secondly, we'll select the least physically active and the most physically active countries in the 9 regions of the world. So we'll do a pilot study, and we'll randomly select 2 Australian states and 1 most physically active country, 1 least physically active country, to do a policy analysis. And the purpose of doing this pilot test is basically to make sure that there is enough content in the policy documents to be able to do a policy analysis on a large scale. We'll be doing categorical rating. So remember, I talked about auditing and assessment. So we'll be doing the auditing, whether the policy is present, and then we'll be doing the assessment. So the criteria is basically that will be, like the quality that will be identified through studies 1 and 2. So we'll determine that, okay, so like a policy is present, and then whether it fulfills the quality criteria that was identified in studies 1 and 2, that like there should be this much or there should be these and these effective strategies and the purpose is to generate like a report card, like Australian Physical Activity Report Card, which basically assigns grades to children and youth for their physical activity along certain criteria. Now, I must acknowledge that this study is in its early stages of development, and it will be refined based on the results that we get from studies 1 and 2. If I summarize my PhD thesis, so basically there will be a systematic review and a Delphi study to be able to identify that how to make existing school-based physical activity interventions more effective, which can help not only the current researchers, but the future researchers as well in developing effective interventions, and then a policy analysis, which will basically initiate a dialogue among various sectors, not only of the government, but of the community, society at large as well, to be able to implement necessary changes to increase the physical activity of girls and to make this society more physically active. So if I sum up, I think that my PhD research, it has a potential to have a real world impact in two ways. First, I think that it can play a role in reaching the GAPA's target, so the Global Action Plan and Physical Activity target to reduce physical inactivity by 15% by 2025 and by, 10% by 2025 and 15% by 2030. And then it is related to so many of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, including but not limited to quality education, gender equality, reduced carbon emission, because obviously if you are being more physically active and you have more cycling paths and you're using active transport rather than vehicles and cars, so there will be reduced carbon emission. And that's all from me. Thank you very much for your patience and attention in listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. As it is tradition, we'll start off with the expert panel in terms of questions. Professor Telford, what are questions for Anum?
Yes. Firstly, I wanted to say thank you, Anum, for your very interesting presentation. What a fabulous body of work you've got planned there. I've got a few different questions for you, but I might just start with this one. And I'm interested in relation to the systematic review, where you're going to look at some of the interventions that haven't provided the findings by gender, and you've got your two strategies. You're going to either ask them to reanalyze and send that information on, or you're going to request access to that data and complete the analyses yourself. I guess my question is, how would you consider, how are you going to manage any of the ethical considerations in relation to accessing that data when initially, you know, people, when they participate, might have consented to the original research teams having access to the data?
I think that's a very important question, and it did not occur to me, to be honest, to like earlier, to think along these lines. So I think I'll probably have to discuss about this thing with my supervisors, but on top of my head, what I can say is that, like, if the original, like the original authors of the study, if they had the data and they obviously took ethical like permission and went through all the ethics process to get the data, yeah, like I was about to say that maybe that can work for me as well, like if they share that data with me, because it will still be anonymous. Like they will not be sharing the details of the individual participants with me. So I think it does address the ethical concern, because as I said that it will still be anonymous, but as I said that it's a very important question, and thanks for raising this up. So I will definitely have a discussion with my supervisors about this in further detail if there are any additional steps that we can take to ensure the ethical considerations that remain intact.
Excellent. Ricky, did you want to ask one of the other panelists before I ask any other questions?
No worries. All right, I'll hand it over to Associate Professor Dickey. Is there anything you'd like to ask?
Yeah, hi, Anum. Thank you for the interesting presentation and very ambitious plan. My first question is regarding the Delphi study, and I was wondering if it would make sense to include some experts that are involved in sports or physical activities that are already very popular with girls. So let's say netball or soccer in Australia, maybe soccer or football would be a good idea, because they usually have both boys and girls, and ask them what kind of strategies they would think of that work for girls. So these are just examples. Maybe there's others. Not that I wanted to increase your amount of work, which brings me to my second thing. So I've noticed that all of your studies heavily rely on responsiveness of experts, researchers, or governments, or not all of it, but a lot of it. And I'm wondering if this sets you up to, yeah, I don't know, to some stress, or let's say it this way, it seems like something I would avoid, having all these studies so heavily rely on people. So you yourself, well, apologies. So I'm just wondering if it might help if, or you should think about what you're setting yourself up for by relying so heavily on other people for your studies.
Okay, sure. So again, I think it's a very important consideration. So for the Delphi one, I think, yeah, because it's like the expert's opinion, so you have to rely on the, like, I know that there is a category of government experts in the Delphi as well. Yeah, but like there are other categories as well. And then like as we proceed, we can definitely take into account if we need to include the government experts in the Delphi study as well. And then with the policy analysis, I think it's more about like getting the documents which may actually already be available on their website, and not relying on the government officials to provide us with those documents. So I think in some ways we can address these concerns, but again, I think it's important that we take into account these concerns so that we have steps and strategies in place to address these concerns. Thank you. It's important. Yeah, I actually, yeah, jotted it down.
Okay, thank you. But for the government aspect, you would have to be able to understand all of the web pages to get to access that information. And it also means it has to be accessible from outside. And I saw that some, or, you know, maybe some languages that you can't speak, but yes, it's all right. I understood you're taking care of it.
Yeah. Also, so for that, I think that's why we have an additional set strategy. So contacting the Global Observatory of Physical Activity country contacts, because I think since they are the specialists and there is existing research which actually like authors, they got in touch with the GOPA country contacts and then they provided them with those documents. So yeah, I think, yeah, but like again, the thing is that like we need to take these things into account to have like steps to make sure that, yeah, like these things are looked at. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Therese. Professor Telford, back to you.
Amanda, you're on mute.
Thank you. And then I was just hoping to ask you a little bit about why you selected the TEO model to underpin your work. I think it's a really interesting model, and I'd like to hear in your own words why you went with that particular model.
Okay, so when I read the model, the important and interesting thing about the TEO model is that it does not treat the specific strategies as secondary outcomes. It treats them as mediating factors, and it focuses upon this thing that these strategies are actually the important things one needs to focus upon and take into account when designing the interventions. So I think this approach, then do not treat them as secondary outcomes, treat them as the mediating factors. And secondly, if you look at the details of the model, so they're related to the comprehensive school physical activity program framework as well. And especially the, again, I have to think, so expanded, extended, expanded. So the extended category where you talk about like developing new strategies to, and like this is what this PhD is about, the developing new strategies to make like girls more physically active. So that extended, like the element, so you can apply that to all the components of the CSPAP. And so like in that way, I think that it's important that if you do it along those three categories of the TEO model, it will help in the better identification of the strategies that can actually make these interventions effective.
Great, thank you.
I'll just open it up. Any questions here? Chair, is there any questions from you?
I'm interested in study 3.
Yeah.
When I first read about it, when I was reading the document, I thought, well, this is huge, this is ambitious. It is a PhD by itself.
Yes.
But then I thought, well, most people in the government would avoid trying to put in things like discriminating between boys and girls. So the policy documents will probably be too general for you to achieve your research aims or the objective, particularly for study 3. So can you tell me more about what you have done so far? Find out whether it's feasible to find out something that tells you about things that governments do or organizations do to increase their activities.
Sure.
It's the activity of the girls.
Yes. So I think I actually worked on this thing after I submitted the CSC document, because I got in touch with a professor at Victoria University. So the model that we are using in the policy analysis, the CAPA framework, so he was the the co-author on that model. Now the thing is that, and I agree with you that it is a very ambitious study and a PhD in itself. That is why we talked about this thing, that by the time we reach that point when we are able to start study 3, so maybe we can just restrict it to Australia and not like do the international level analysis, because the depth and the breadth of the analysis that we are aiming for, I admit that, yeah, like it will get ambitious. Now, the second thing that like these things will not be determined in the documents about the discrimination and everything. So when I was talking to this potential collaborator, so now the thing is this, that when you, I'll give you an example. So let's say you go to the website of the Department of Health. Now, we will not be able to find policies simply there, that like there is a section policies and then the physical activity policies. So we will need to look at the policies that belong to different things. So for example, if the Department of Health has policies related to schools, certain other departments have policies related to support transport, if it's for the cycling and for the footpaths. So like the thing is that you will look at the policies of different departments, and then within each department, policies like in different sections in different areas. So yes, this was my concern as well, and then I discussed it with my supervisors that like, if you look at some of the policy documents, I looked at some of the Australian physical activity policy documents, they simply talk about the recommended guidelines. But again, those documents did not include the ones that I just mentioned. That if you go to the footpaths and the active transport policy. So I think we'll like the documents from each department, they'll piggyback the documents from other departments. And then the last thing is this, that like, again, like having this conversation with the potential collaborators. So even if we are not able to find out a lot of things in those documents that are supportive of girls, so I think this will be an important contribution in itself, that like if I publish a paper and then if we reach the wider audience and tell them that, look, the existing physical activity policies, they just don't have anything that is supportive of girls. So I think that will be a very good point to generate a dialogue among the different sectors of the community that, okay, what do we need to do now to make these policies more inclusive of girls? Yeah.
Any questions from the audience? No, I don't think we have anything else. Amanda or Therese, any last questions?
Yeah, I've got one more quick one for you, Anum. I'm just interested in the timing in terms of your methodology in relation to the ethics. So is there a reason that you've staggered your study 2 and 3 ethics several months apart, or could they go in together? Could you explain?
Well, I think so that I did not think about this thing, like when I was writing it down, that they can go together. But now that you are saying it, yeah, maybe like we can do this thing, because obviously we will be getting, like if we get the ethics into study 1, so that will be, but yes, I think we need to have gotten data from study 1 and study 2, because that will be the criteria against which we'll be assessing the policy documents, that whether they have those effective components and strategies. So I think, yeah, we'll probably wait.
Thank you. It makes sense.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. All right, there's no other questions. Could you please give a round of applause for Anum, and well done. So thank you very much for all of those attending here in person and also online. Could I please ask Chris, Mike, Amanda, and Therese to stay on the line, and I'll get Alex and Taryn to join you shortly for the post-panel discussion. Thank you very much to everybody else.
Thank you.